Welcome, everybody. Always off brand, live here at eTail Boston from the second floor of the beautiful Sheraton Hotel. Joining me today, Brent Peterson from Talk Commerce. Brent, good to have you on the pod.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And our cherished guest today, again, I got to know this person from a long time ago connection, Kate Nishimura. Shout out to you from Sourcing Journal, Eddie Hertzman, who's no longer there. But when we first started this podcast almost 4.5 years ago, she was one of our first guests, and she introduced me to the great Meghan Hall from Sourcing Journal joining us today. Meghan, great to see you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. And it's weird because I feel like I'm always calling Scott for his hot takes, and now it's my turn. So returning the favor.
Exactly. So Meg, we talked about this. And it's like, oh, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I mean, this is probably going to come out in the next 7 days or so. A lot going on in the sourcing world. And for those not familiar with Sourcing Journal, which is my go-to, subscribe now, by the way.
Subscribe now, by the way.
Subscribe now. Sourcing Journal is phenomenal. Tell us a little bit about what Sourcing Journal is.
Sure. Sourcing Journal is a business-to-business publication that covers the backside of all things fashion, apparel, and retail. So that's everything from the sourcing of the components that go into those products to shipping them over to the United States or shipping them to their final destination. So third-party logistics, manufacturing, automation, technology, legal. Yeah, there's no shortage of things to talk about in the sourcing world.
So everybody, it's like AI and tariff talk is basically what everybody's chit-chatting about. And I don't even know where. So I've worked with manufacturers my whole life. I'm obviously, everybody's gotten hit by this in some regard, even if you source domestically. So like I talk about Spangle all the time, but the machines that they do to make the product are typically from somewhere in the world. And so they're getting hit by tariffs, not by ingredients or their products, because it's domestic, made in the USA. So where are we? I can't even tell you what a tariff is. And I love, just before we hit record, you were talking to our good friend Lana, who I'm going to see later, how people don't understand how apparel works. If you went backwards at the source, come gray goods. Can you explain a little bit, just quickly, how, like, when we buy shirts and jackets and pants, it is complex. How does this work?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, it is very complex because unlike some other categories, apparel has a lot of different components that have to go into it. And sometimes they're not all even made in the same country of origin. So you might have cotton inbound from India that then gets shipped to Vietnam to be made into denim, but then the rivets on the denim are made in China, as is the buttons or the zipper. So all of these components have to be then shipped into one country, let's call it for this sake Vietnam, to be put together as a finished good and then shipped to their final destination. For this case, let's use the US as the final destination, just because, as you mentioned, the tariffs are impacting the US consumer probably the most. But if you think about all those different things that have to go into an item before it ever even makes it into a finished good, it's quite a process. So that makes it pretty complex at times.
So where are we on the manufacturers that you're talking to and you're reporting on? Again, we could go down the supply chain list because everything is a domino effect with ports, with warehouse availability, people bringing stuff. Tariff games, there should be a new show called Tariff Games. What are you reporting on right now? Like, what are in the footwear and apparel? And people don't understand. And I had the pleasure of working for large footwear brands, small. You have to make these molds. Like, this is not even a 6 months. Like, these are 24, 36 months out. They have to figure out what molds, what uppers, all the materials. So I have no idea how these people are pulling this off.
I think the interesting thing on that, too, just talking about footwear, is that Nike has said that it's going to still be more expensive to make it in country than it would be to make it in China, not no matter what the tariff is, but at 100%, they can still make it cheaper.
Yeah, so I would love to start with the idea that manufacturing in the U.S. is or is not a good idea. So certainly some footwear and apparel is made in the U.S. today. It's not a very large proportion of what is actually consumed by the U.S. buyer, but some of it is made here. But to your point, it is very expensive to make things in the U.S. Part of that is because of labor costs, but part of it is because those components that I mentioned earlier still have to be imported into the U.S. in a lot of cases. So although you might be able to make a cotton t-shirt that is made with cotton that was grown in California and processed throughout the American supply chain. If you're trying to make anything with any level of technical difficulty, so think like women's intimates or jeans or anything that has a metal or plastic component to it, likely is probably going to have to be shipped in even for the finished good to be made in the US. So yes, definitely it becomes more expensive. And although I think a lot of brands would like to make their product in the US because it's good for business and good for from the consumer lens, it's just not super feasible. So I would say that's not a super common game that we're seeing, except from some of the biggest retailers and brands that have the money to pull that off or are making pretty simple products like the t-shirt that I mentioned. I think another tariff game that we're starting to see is some companies are able to change the makeup of the product so that it is classified under a different tariff code when it enters the United States.
Yeah, so that's the HTS code,
Yes.
right? The harmonized
Tariff schedule,
which again, no consumer had to think about or feel, you know what I mean? This is all raised awareness, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's the number that makes it all happen, right?
Right. So we're seeing this particularly in footwear. There's like some small adjustments that you can make, and it literally could be like a piece of plastic is attached to the bottom of the shoe that then gets ripped off when it reaches its final destination in the US, and it then classifies as a different HTS code. So that's definitely something that we're seeing. Something that we probably saw a lot more in the past that we'll probably see diminish in the near future is what's called transshipping. So that would be your finished good is made in China. It then gets shipped to a warehouse in Vietnam to add one little tiny last thing to it.
I know yes, this was an early game that a lot of people were trying to do because over the last, I don't even know, 20 years, most of this cut and sew, a lot of the molding and everything done in Vietnam, they're all owned by Chinese factories, which I don't know if anybody knows this, and I'm sorry to be an alarmist. The major U.S. brands drove that. So they're in cahoots with these China factories. They said, hey, the labor costs are going in China for 20 years. Let's go move to Vietnam. Let's move to Bangladesh. Let's move to Cambodia. Let's move to all these different places in Southeast Asia, typically. And so this is all driven by the same people, which is just comical. So transshipping was a big deal until it wasn't.
Right. And right now we're kind of seeing the Trump administration decree that they're going to start cracking down on transshipping for tariff reasons.
That's exactly, yeah.
But while I'm not actually sure how that can be enforced, like that kind of remains to be seen, I do think that it's a pretty heavy risk to be doing transshipping with that kind of enforcement if they are able to pull it off. So I think we'll see a little bit less of that when we consider the tariff games. The last and arguably most difficult one of these is diversifying your supply chain, which I'm sure everyone that's listening to this has heard over and over again, but it is something that I know a lot of brands are considering. The tough part about that right now is where do you go? So it's very erratic with the way that tariffs are being announced right now. It is very difficult to keep track of what's what and very difficult to know what could be next. Right now we have 30% on China because there's a pause in place with China for what we previously saw as triple-digit tariffs. But we don't know. Come November, that rate could go up. It could go down. If it goes up, you've stayed in China and you've, kind of blocked yourself off for lower tariff rates coming out of other countries. But if it goes down, you've left China and you now are paying a higher tariff rate to get your stuff from Vietnam. So
yeah, and we saw this in 2018 in the first round of tariffs when he put these in place. These are big ships, man. You can't not move your supply chain and where you're making this stuff. And this is 3.5 years and things are going to change again. So that's what's also seized the industry and seized this motion is because people are like, well, I'm just not going to do anything. Like I'm just not going to make any moves because I can't afford to.
Yeah. Analysis paralysis.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see manufacturers starting to plan at least the factory in the U.S. to try to mitigate that, or do you see people just sitting on the sideline waiting for the next 3 years to pass?
So I think there's a lot of inquiries going into existing American factories. The problem with building a new factory is that it takes a really long time. And today, a lot of factories are looking to be more automated than they have been in the past. And as Scott mentioned earlier, the machines that make that happen are not made in the US.
Exactly.
I'm primarily a business and technology reporter with a definite emphasis on the technology side. And so that's something that I've been really heavily considering, both for the factory use case, but also for the warehouse automation side of things. So that is also a problem, right? Like your favorite brand that is able to get stuff to you for cheap, or Amazon that is able to get you stuff for cheap, is partly because their warehouses are able to fulfill it
Yeah.
using automation.
Right.
And if they can't get that machinery, the cost could go up to fulfill it. And the cost could be actual cost, or it could be the cost of things moving slower, which is obviously not what the US consumer is looking for today.
Well, the other, it's not as fun a headline. It's not a greatest mass market story, right? On a huge, but what you guys report on and see is you dig down in these HTS codes we talk about, right? So everybody just hears 30%, but you have to kind of drill down into each category because it's not 30% to everybody. And the only thing that drives me batty, Megan, is nobody remembers this is 30% on top of the 20% if you make your goods in China and you use aluminum or steel that we had to deal with in 2018. The duties aren't going away. This is just compounding. And I have not read hardly anything other than Sourcing Journal, seriously, because you guys are in this and know this and talk to these people. And people just like, oh, it's 30%, they'll eat it, it's no problem. It's 30 on top of 20, on top of this, on top of that.
Right.
I mean, am I crazy?
No, you're not crazy. And what's kind of interesting about this is that a lot of retailers are saying that they can't even absorb 25%.
No, there's no compression. See, this is the problem. The factories, they want the volume and they need the business, and they've invested millions in automation. People aren't the problem. It's automation is the problem. It's the problem and the solve. You know what I'm saying? Like, no matter before tariffs, people were figuring out more inexpensive ways to build quality product all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just, it's insane to me as somebody who's the manufacturing side. It's like, this is just, and we haven't seen it. You're going to see it kind of creep out in different things. But what are the retailers and brands are, you know, the big headlines are, and in the Amazon earnings call, we're not seeing implications of tariffs.
You know, I think one of the interesting questions that I would have is, are you talking to business leaders, or which business leaders are saying the ones that are being helped by tariffs? Are there people out there that are like, oh yeah, this is great, I'm going to double down on this. Hopefully there's 1,000% tariff. Is there a lot of business leaders that are saying that?
No.
The other thing that Kate and you have recorded, you know, there before all of this nonsense, there's some really cool stuff happening in Los Angeles with denim and cut and sews. There's some great people trying to bring footwear manufacturing, which is, by the way, extraordinarily hard to do.
So difficult.
So hard. And they're doing some cool stuff. It's premium product, it's premium branding, but it's lovely. And people were doing it. So
Right.
I don't know, you know, that's not going to change this. It's actually going to make it more expensive.
Right. You would think so. I guess for a more in-depth answer to the question of who is rooting for this, not a whole lot of companies that I have seen have said that this is outwardly a good thing for them. There's a whole lot of companies that aren't saying pretty much anything.
Yeah,
about
that's
it.
what's so
Because
crazy.
there's somebody that said just eat it, and I feel like you should have a track that just said just eat it.
I should eat it.
Because that's what the messaging is, right? Eat the tariffs, and you like the manufacturer should take on the 30% and just lose 30%.
I don't think they're going to do that. As much as they've been able to absorb some of that cost in the past, I think manufacturers are done absorbing the cost because they already make the goods for rock bottom cheap in a lot of these countries. What I would say, though, is that one of the reasons I think some companies are not yet really talking about tariffs is because a lot of their inventory for the back half of 2025 has already been imported into the U.S.
That's a bell. I gotta give you a bell because that's a juicy nugget that not people understand. That's why the mass media and everything is like the consumer perception is, I haven't seen tariffs hit. I haven't seen tariff hits. Oh wait, it's coming.
It's coming. I would say, you might start to see prices creep up around the holiday time, but more likely in early 2026. I think, like I said, so a lot of the inventory has already been imported into the U.S. for holiday season. Part of that is just the way that things are. Like, companies bring their inventory for holiday in really early because they plan it out so early.
Yeah.
The other part of it, though, is like a lot of companies were front loading their inventory because of their fears over tariffs. So even if they weren't talking about it, they were acting on it. That is my kind of sense.
That's another bell right there.
But yeah, I mean, I think you will see maybe a little bit of price increase around holiday. It's hard for me to project that exactly, but I think more likely we're going to start seeing the implications of tariffs in 2026. Obviously, that is heavily dependent on the way that things go over the latter half of 2025 with the tariffs and the macroeconomic environment. But like Scott said, we're at eTail, and this morning I heard an analyst from Bloomberg Intelligence saying that the consumer is still spending at a healthy rate and that she expects to see that continue so long as prices aren't skyrocketing. A big part of that too is that the consumer is always looking for value. So even if prices are increasing, they're still looking for the lowest cost item.
Yeah.
So if you're able to beat your competitor by a margin of $1 or $2 on something like a cotton t-shirt, the consumer might still buy it, even if it's a little bit more expensive, because when you compare it to everything else in the market, it's still a little bit less expensive.
Yeah. Again, this isn't this is my opinion, is that our unemployment is still low. There's hard macroeconomic numbers that just aren't. We've built up a great economy. As far as manufacturers in the apparel and soft goods side, what are the big stories that either you have out on Sourcing Journal or that you're working on that you can divulge here at eTail, or other things that you're seeing at this conference and that we'd love to talk about, Meg?
I guess I would point back to someone that you spoke a little bit about earlier, which is my colleague, Kate Nishimura. So she's doing a lot of the American side manufacturing stories that you'll see posted on Sourcing Journal. And the work that she's done is really important. She's talked to some manufacturers out of New Jersey, some garment people in California, kind of all over the country, looking at what it would really mean for them to try to bring manufacturing back to the US. One other thing that I think is kind of important, but not necessarily always discussed, is the intersection between immigration policy and manufacturing in the US.
Yes.
Particularly in fashion and apparel. So fashion and apparel is not a huge game in terms of manufacturing in the US as it is, but the companies who are working to do that are already struggling to retain their seamstresses and get new seamstresses.
And you guys do it. So again, Sourcing Journal kind of, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a wonderful hub of the reality of the political climate and geopolitical things met with actual industry and how things are sourced and how things get to market. And these things are impactful, right? And it's a nice blend. You don't have to be one way or the other. They don't, you know what I'm saying? You just kind of, these are actual real impacts that have economic outcomes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yes, everyone subscribe to Sourcing Journal, and you too can have all these nuggets like Scott.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, my colleague and I wrote the exact story that I just described, which is like, how could Trump's immigration policy impact the fashion and apparel manufacturing business in the US? And obviously there's what's going on today, and then there's what's the aspiration from the Trump administration for the future.
Right.
The Trump administration has been pretty bullish on manufacturing things like technology, things like defense related stuff, and ships. Ships is probably the most directly interesting to us, but he's made it clear that he's not particularly interested in researching the American apparel and footwear manufacturing scheme. And that's tough too, because that is a huge import that the US brings in.
It's huge.
But it would also be very difficult to close that gap between what the US imports and what it makes.
Is also, which I know about because this is the work I do, is people have been working on nearshoring for years and years and years, because there's great skill, there's great talent, and there's a massive cost efficiency and cost benefit to get the product produced or basically assembled in Mexico and then bring it up. That's now becoming a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing Mexico have a proposed higher tariff rate than a lot of the other countries that are in Southeast Asia. That becomes problematic because it's like, okay, you can make it in Mexico and you can bring it over by truck maybe, which could potentially make it a little cheaper. Probably not when you consider how ocean freight prices are looking, but maybe. That used to be valuable when the U.S. had a friendlier trade relationship with Mexico, but the way that things are going right now, it makes it a little less easy to do.
Yeah.
I know Mexico is very interested in preserving its own economy for sure. And so it'll be interesting to go see where that goes. Canada too. Canada is less of an importer for fashion and apparel products, but for other products, I mean, automotives, things like that. And Canada, the Canadian people are scorned over the tariffs. So
they are. And one of the other tariff game early one was, which again is played out as not actually a good result or not doable, is a a lot of apparel and anybody's like, okay, I'm going to bring it in. Instead, we're going to go transship it basically to Canada and bring it down from Canada. Well, we've screwed that up as well. Good times. Anyway, so they're running out of options, right? You're getting in the corner. There's bonded warehouses. There's the tariff games are fantastic. There is all kinds of shenanigans, and you guys have reported on this and done a great job on factories trying to creatively problem solve on how they invoice, how they list HTS codes, how they're put in containers and what the containers and the shipping documents. There's all kinds of shenanigans being played. We are not set up. Our border patrol and border customs agents, how are they going to do this, Meg?
That is the $1 million question, right? And I think a good example of that is earlier this year on quote unquote Trump's Liberation Day. He canceled what is known as the de minimis loophole, one of mine and Scott's hobby horses, for goods that were inbound from China and Hong Kong. Now that continues to be the case. I bring up the Liberation Day piece because Trump specifically targeted China during that first wave because customs needed the time to figure it out. China is the hardest regulatory burden to bear when it comes to de minimis imports, which also means that it's probably the best way for customs to learn. The idea was that, they were going to collapse de minimis from other countries once customs had gotten the knack of doing it on goods imported from China. It sort of remains to be seen on whether they did.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult thing to do, on top of the fact that they're now trying to figure out how to collect tariffs from these respective countries and sort of patrol the HTS codes and patrol any sort of fraud and theft. It's difficult.
And that means every bit of mail, right, has to get inspected. The invoice has to get inspected for everything coming in now.
Right, where previously you were able to bring anything that was valued under $800 into the US without a lot of scrutiny and without duties.
If I'm going to turn my frown upside down, what the world is great at, because global trade, which you guys do a good job, shout out again, sourcingjournal.com, is the markets adapt. And the markets are creative, and entrepreneurship and the spiritual creative. Like the markets are they'll figure some stuff out and they will adapt. When, how, to be seen. And you're the one who's going to show us and tell us why and how.
Maybe so, but yeah, it definitely is to be seen, and I don't think it will be seen for at least 6 months.
Oh, I think that's the
bare minimum.
Bare minimum.
But
my pet food has already gone up. Okay. I'm starting to see it's going to creep in here and there. And then it's going to be interesting if the supply is lower, and we saw this through Prime Day, the discounts were not as deep as they were previously.
Mm-hmm.
So, shout out anybody in supply chain, forecast management, inventory management. My tip to Kat, I don't know how you're doing it. Procurement, I don't know how you're doing it.
Good luck to you all.
Anything else, Megan, before we get you out of here?
No, I just want to say thanks again for having me. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I would love to chat more in the future.
Absolutely. Is this your first eTail? I can't remember.
Yes, it is. So I moderated a couple panels this week, but it is my first eTail.
How's it been?
So far, so good. It's been some interesting discussions, lots of talk about AI, which is another hobby horse of mine. And definitely some good connections. So happy to be here. Hopefully back next year.
Yeah, I would love to have you. I love having you. I love talking to you. Thank you for reaching out to me. But I should mention, anybody, if they've gotten this far, you do great work on the technology of how things are made and shipped and held and delivered, right? That is a big part of this because there's a lot of really cool stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. There's tons of really cool stuff going on in the factories, in the warehouses, and even kind of in the consumer-facing technology, which I've started to cover a lot as well. AI is definitely well on its way. I think some pieces of companies' AI strategies are maybe a little bit overblown at this point.
Yeah.
But it's on the up and up for sure, and I'm very interested to see where it goes. And also, one thing I would say is important to keep an eye on is the complementary technology, right? So RFID has been around for years and years and years and years and years, but AI is really giving it another boost, like a new resurgence in a way that we probably hadn't seen maybe 5 years ago. The same is true with robotics, right? Like robots have been around for quite a long time. We've seen stationary robots doing great work in warehouses, but AI is really boosting the way that robots work too. We're seeing new form factors. We're seeing autonomous mobile robots kind of enter the scene.
I've seen it myself.
It's very interesting. So
Even the candy factory. They're doing all kinds of really interesting stuff.
Even at restaurants, getting served by a robot.
yes.
Miso. I want to invest in Miso. I think that's going to be a game changer. All right, Meghan Hall, you're fantastic. I appreciate you coming by. And this will be out sometime. And why? Because people matter. Because great people like Meghan and Brent. That's why we love doing this. You're listening to Always Off Brand live at eTail. More coming up from eTail, I'm sure later on. Bye-bye.
Hey there, this is Haley from Quickfire, and they want me to read this so you know what this podcast is part of and how to find out more if you want. Always Off Brand is a production of Quickfire LLC and a part of the Learn and Laugh series on the Quickfire Podcast Network. For more information, go to quickfirenow.com. Have a good one, and thanks for listening.